All right, we'll wait 1 more minute and then we'll get going. Can someone that's already on the stream confirm that you can all hear me correctly? All right, let's get going. We've got enough people, and then we'll start with the intro anyway, and then we'll dive into, as I was saying to Dixit initially, I don't have anything set up, so it's a brand new, well, it's the same org that I used on the last webinar. So the base of Revenue Cloud is set up so we can create a quote, but nothing related to approvals yet. So we'll go in and we'll set it up from the ground. Hopefully, again, we have enough time, but we'll see how far we can make it. All right, so let's get going. We're going to talk about Revenue Cloud Advanced Approvals coming out in winter 25. I know some of our environments have been upgraded already, but the org that I'm using is, again, the same Scratch org that I leveraged for the previous webinar. All right, so Advanced Approvals with a small typo there. Going forward is going to be leveraging Flow Orchestration. So it's a big switch from the database approval, advanced approvals that we had before. So now we're going to use two new flow types, one or the other really, for advanced approvals. So you can either use auto-launched approval orchestration. If you do choose to go that route, and that's the one we're going to use today, you do need to create an Apex class and a Visual Force page or a Lightning Web Component to launch it. Or you can also use a record-triggered approval orchestration. If you do go that route, I mean, it's slightly different than what we're used to, right? Because the typical flow is the user will actually go in and hit submit for approval. So if you go with record-triggered approval orchestration, then it's going to work slightly differently. But past getting it kicked off, then they both work the same at that point. Approvers, and we're going to see this when we set up the flow, can be users. They can be user references. They can be also groups, which we had in the previous version of advanced approvals. And they can also be queues now in the new advanced approvals. And so obviously the approval workflow itself is a flow orchestration. So you need potentially multiple subflows to handle everything that comes downstream of this. So any field updates that you want to do, or the evaluation, if you want to go into an approval or not, is going to be handled with another flow, so on and so forth, right? If you want to send out any emails, anything, that's all going to be done through flows. All right, so if there's no questions, we're just going to go right away and jump into Salesforce and start building this. All right, so I've got a sample quote there, nothing different than what we're used to so far. It is the same one that I used also in my billing demo. If you haven't seen this on the YouTube channel, if you're curious, you can go and have a look. All right, so let's get going on this. So first thing we need to go is we'll go to setup, go to our flows, and we want to create a new flow for our approval workflow. So let's get going. We will start from scratch. All right, so here are the options that you can use as far as flow types are concerned. So you can either use the auto launch approval orchestration. That's what we're going to use today. Or if you scroll down, you can also have a record triggered approval orchestration. All right, so let's use this one. Let's hit create. All right, so blank slate. Let's get going on this. All right, so the first thing, so this gets triggered once you hit submit for approval, right? So typically the first thing you're going to want to do is do your updates, right? Potentially set the quote to in review or something like this. So let's do stage one is going to be simply updating that quote. All right, so that's going to be our step one. Then once we're past step one, another stage we can set is we'll set it to manager approval, and we'll just go in and create a couple different stages, and then we can actually go in and add the details that we need to add in there. So we'll do first manager approval, and now you can also do, as we could with the old advanced approvals, let's call it that, you can do serial approvals or you can do parallel approvals. So if I've got a stage like this in my approval workflow, so one option is, let's say, you can have it simply be manager approval, and then we can add another stage afterwards. And this one could be finance and operations. So if you want to have parallel approvals, both approval workflows are going to be held in the same stage, so they're going to get triggered at the same time. And then if they're in different stage, they're going to be serial approvals, right? So if we want to go in and set our manager approval first, we can go in, and then two options are available to you when you add something within your stage. So you can create either your approval step or a background step. Background step being if you want to run another flow to do any other updates, you would choose that, or your approval step if you want to select where the approval goes through. All right, so let's call again our manager approval step. All right, so select when to start the step, right? So you've got a couple options here. So there could be, you could have approvals within the same thing, but they go one after the other. I think Salesforce would still consider this to be a serial approval. So you could say it only starts when the previous step starts. Different stages do mean serial approvals. Yes, Dixit. So if you want them to be parallel, you would hold them in within the same stage. All right, so in our case, you want to do if the specified evaluation flow returns true, then you would start the step, right? So the evaluation flow is essentially, pretty much a subflow that you would choose to evaluate. Go look at your quote lines as a discount for software beyond 20%, for example. And we can go in and actually create this afterwards. But you can, you have the flexibility of flows to actually go and look at your quote and related records to figure out which steps you want to go in. So we don't have this created yet, so we can come back to this, or maybe it's not going to let us save without this. So we should actually jump back into this. Let's save our approval workflow so far. All right, couple errors, but that's fine. Let's go and create a new flow for the evaluation flow. Again, we want to start from scratch. And evaluation flow is another type that you can use on this. So evaluation flow is what you want to select. Hit create. All right, and on this, you're going to be able, so the approval workflow gets the record ID passed to it right away, right when you submit for approval. So now you need to send that down to your evaluation flow as well to make sure it gets it and evaluates the quote correctly and gets the record ID. So we can simply set this to record ID. There's no setting to no, there's nothing under setup or settings. They said it's the approvals are available right away. They should be available right away in Winter 25. So your record ID variable, you want to make sure is available for input. Done. All right, and then within this, you're going to be able to evaluate your quote. Let's maybe keep this simple because we don't want to spend too much time. But obviously, you would want a loop potentially through your quote lines, filter on which quote lines you want to look at, evaluate discount, evaluate anything else that you need to get in there. But let's get our quote. Where the quote ID equals. Yeah, it seems like we can use it on any object. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any restriction. As far as the documentation goes, it looks like it's only available within Revenue Cloud. But then once it's available in your environment, as with, I guess, the previous version, there's no limitations. But with the, there might be restrictions, though. You might need to be a Revenue Cloud user to be able to use the approvals workflow. It remains to be tested. I have not tested this, to be honest. All right, so we'll get our quote, and then, so what you want to do is you want to make a decision, because we're ultimately what we're going to set is, you see that variable on the left is orchestration condition met, which can return true or false. This is what you're going to set, and that's how it's going to come into your approval workflow. So let's, we'll keep it simple. We'll just say that if a quote has a name, it's enough for our approval to trigger. All right, so as long as our quote name is not null, we want to go in and say that the evaluation is true. So we want to go in. And if not, no approval is required. So if we go into, so if our condition is met, then we want to make sure we assign the is orchestration condition met to true, because we want this to go on in our approvals workflow. So and then if there's no approval, we can also set a value, but in this case, we'll simply set that to false. All right, so we can save this. No, that's not the orchestration condition met variable comes out of the box when you create an evaluation flow. It's not something that I created. It was already on there when I created that new flow. All right, so let's refresh our approval workflow. Let's go back to our approval step. All right, so condition when the specified evaluation flow returns true, the step starts. Our evaluation flow is going to be the quote evaluation for approvals. And again, as I just spoke through, the evaluation flow is auto launch when you get there. And if it returns true, then the criteria is met, which is what we want. The action to run is going to be another pre-built flow that you can launch on. All right, so you want to evaluate approvals request. That's another flow. Let's open it up. That's another flow that comes out of the box. It's a screen flow, and that's what's going to show to your approver on whatever record you're approving. This is the screen that they're going to see. So at the end of this, we're going to have to go on our quote and modify their Lightning page to make sure we add this screen flow on there. And that's going to show up when they go for an approval. Again, this could be, you can add more on this. One thing that you would be able to add, for example, is when you submit for approval, you're asked for any comments. By default, those don't show up on there. So you could add that on there. And then as the approver, you go in, you make your decision, you add any comments that you want to add, and you hit finish. And then the approval is going to go on to the next step if there is a next step. So we'll leave that one standard, go back to our approval workflow. All right, so as I was saying, we have a couple different approver types that are available to us. So you can set it to user resource, group resource, queue, and queue resource. So user, group, queue is going to be a specific reference to a user, group, or a queue. And then resource is going to be if you want to look at a value from a field, right? So user, I could select my manager as the approver right away on this. The other option would be to use the user resource and then go through the relationship and actually get. So, I mean, you could, running user and then, oops, sorry, running user, for example, and then you could go and look for the manager ID of that resource, but it could be anything, right? It could be a field on your quote, could be a custom field anywhere that you've got on there that holds the user ID that you want to be the approver. And same thing for the other resources, right? So you can formula as anything that returns an ID for any one of those groups could be used in there. So let's simply use a user for now, and let's specify who the approver would be. And looking at this, I don't see any, unless you use a resource. And as far as I can tell in the documentation, there's no easy way to set this to have a delegated approver. I could be wrong. Again, I haven't played with this for that long, but I can see a way that we would be able to do this at this point. All right, so the record ID will set this to the record ID that got passed when we got in. And then you have the option to lock your record, right? So one issue that we had with advanced approvals is by default, there was no locking of the records that you were submitting for approvals, right? So there was a different way we could get there, but no easy way necessarily to do it. Now you can do it this way. I know there was either in this release or the previous one, there's also a new flow action that you can use to lock record, but that wasn't available before. So you can set the record to be locked, and then you can allow the approver to edit the locked record or not if you want. And then if there is an approval chain, you can set a name, right? So you could call it a manager or anything. You can, takes in any text input is going to be can be assigned to this. I have not found anyway. There are references in the documentation to approval, to being able to preview approvals. I have not figured out how we can actually preview any approval when you're setting this up. Again, it could be just my knowledge. The documentation is not super complete yet, so could be something that I missed, but I haven't figured out how we would be able to do that. Locking, no, does not, as far as I know, lock the quote lines, only locks the quote itself. So, I mean, any changes to your lines would theoretically trigger an update to your quote as well. But if you want it to be thorough, you would actually have to go in and create maybe a subflow that goes in and locks your quote lines to be sure that no changes are made to your quote lines. And then finally, when the step is completed, so we'll leave that to record ID is just text or object. Yeah, I mean, it's a standard. Again, the record ID variable is the variable that gets created along with your approval orchestration right away. So this one exists on there. So it gets passed from your approval, from the record to the approval workflow. And then you can use it in all your subflows for evaluation, for updates. You can use that record ID. But so by default, you can, but I could do a get in my first step and get all the details from that record if I needed to. All right, so that's my manager approval step. We can save this. All right, so once that one has gone through approval, the one thing you want to look at is, at this point, there could be a rejection, right? So you don't want to go in through your next step. So you'll need to add a decision in there to make sure that the manager has approved, and you want to go through on the other step. Or if not, it's going to go in and we're going to do an update and set our quote to rejected. Let's edit our decision. Right, so manager. I mean, and from my testing while I'm going through this, I'll say this takes some getting used to. There's obviously some more flexibility that we didn't have before because it's in flows. As with anything, I guess it takes some getting used to, but there is some more clicks for some of those steps that we have to go through that were happening automatically before. All right, so we want to know whether the manager is approved or not. So we need to go into our stage, and then in our step, and then on the output of our step, we should have the approval decision. And then we want to know whether he has approved or not. So, and that's again not documented, and there's no options when you get to evaluating your approval decision. What has worked so far for me is you want the actual value that gets passed on your approval decision is approve. And then the default outcome, let's set this to manager rejected. We'll assume that if it's not approved, it's rejected. So it goes the other way around. If it has been approved, then we want to move on to our finance and operations approval. So it's this. All right. So on the manager rejected, we're going to want to go here and set this a rejected. Again, we'll need a subflow to handle that portion of it. So let's go in and create our subflow for quote updates. Oh, sorry, going back to, yes, we do need to unlock the record if it's rejected. Good call out. So I should actually go in and make that update. One thing that I missed earlier, sorry, when you select your evaluation flow, you want to make sure that you set your input value. So you pass the record ID from your orchestration down to your evaluation flow. So again, save this as is, and we'll create one more flow where we can do our updates to the quote. So let's start from scratch. All right, so we want an auto launch flow. All right, so in this one, so you could create different flows for every possible scenario, right? The one thing that I figured we could do is you can also create, so we'll take in the record ID from our orchestration again. So we set our record ID, allow it for input. We can pass that down. And we can also pass a another variable to say which type of update we're making. So you could either have multiple flows, one for setting it to in review, one for approved, one for rejected. But you can also just do a decision up front in your flow and then go from there. Let's call it update type. It's going to be text, and we'll allow it for input. So then we can upfront do a decision on what update type it is. So if update type equals submitted, so we'll use our simple variable. So what we'll do is from our orchestration, we'll pass a text value down to our subflow to say what the update type is. So if the update type is submitted, then we go in that branch. Let's add one more for update type equals approved. Again, update type, approved, so on and so forth, right? You could have multiple branches for this. Just create one more for rejected. All right, so these are our options now for the update type. So in every one of them now we can do an update to our quote record, right? So if it's submitted, we can go in and say, okay, so what updates do we want to do when the quote is submitted? So it's already locked, so no need to do anything on there. But we want to set the status to in review now. So for the quote, where quote ID equals our record ID that's being passed down, we want to set the status to in review. All right, that's good. Then if it's approved, actually copy this. Call this one approved. All right, same quote, but now we want to set this to approved. And finally, if it's rejected, now we'll have all the updates from here. Hopefully it doesn't. It doesn't fail if it's locked. In my testing, it hasn't so far. But I assume because, yeah, no, it's a good question, Thomas. It's in my testing so far, I didn't run into any issues with the locking happening. But there's also, you should also consider that I've set the, if we go back quickly to our approval workflow and go to our approval step, I do allow the approver to edit the lock record. So I imagine whoever is submitting this is taking the action. The record isn't locked for them if they do approve it or reject it. So maybe that's why it goes through. We would probably want to test if that's unchecked. What happens if you try to run a... I am the admin. Yeah, that's true. We'll have... no, it's worth testing. Frankly, I've been limited so far because I've been working in Scratch org, so I can't create a lot of users. So I have had a hard time testing multiple scenarios based on different users. But yes, that's definitely, it's a good call out. This shouldn't be fully tested because multiple things could happen on there. All right, so I mean, for today we'll be fine. So let's keep going with this. But yes, that should be tested. And so if it's rejected, we want to reject it. And then to your point earlier, maybe we need to also unlock this record once it's been rejected if we want to be able to edit it. All right, so we want to unlock the record ID that was passed down. Hit save. And let's approvals quote update. It's also where if you wanted to, Dick said, if you wanted to lock the quote lines, you could do it on submission here as well if you wanted to do that, as long again as you make sure that they are unlocked if they need to be unlocked afterwards. All right, let's activate this. All right, and now back to our approval workflow. We'll just refresh so we can use our newly created flow. All right, cool. So when the quote is in review now, we want to add a step, background step. We want it to start as soon as the stage starts, and the flow is going to be our quote update. And this is where we want to pass our different values. So we want to pass the record ID that we used in there, and the update type we're going to set to submitted. Let's call the background step submitted for approval. All right. Well, there's this down here. Maybe answers our question. Select who to run the action as. So right now it's set to run as the automated process user, which could have access to editing the record despite the lock on there. If you do end up running it as a specified user or selected user, then you could run into issues with this. But that's probably why I avoided any locks on this so far. All right, so now we want to go down to our post approval. If it's rejected, again, we'll add a new stage for the quote that's getting rejected. And within this, we'll add a background step. It's going to call our the subflow we created. We'll use the same flow again. Could be multiple flows. I just figure from my point of view, it's a bit easier to do it this way, but you can go whichever way you want. And then the update type in this case is rejected. Let's save. All right, so far we've got, I mean, this would be already working and we can actually go in and test this right away before we go any farther. Let's activate this. So once you've got the approval workflow, now you need to add a couple components to your page. You also need, again, you probably need to have some code to be able to launch this correctly. So you'll need a class that passes the flow name. And I can share this afterwards if anyone's interested in getting the Lightning Web component and the Apex class. It's fairly simple, and Salesforce actually provides an example on their website. So I can also link to this. But so first thing we're going to want to do is on our quote object, let's go to buttons, and we want to create a new action to launch our approval workflow. The action type. So the example, again, that Salesforce gives is a Visualforce page. What I've created is a Lightning Web component, but it gets to the same place. So quote approval is the Lightning Web component that I want to launch. The label is going to be simply submit for approval. And we can hit save. All right, so our button is created. Let's go to page layout, make sure it's added on there. All right, submit for approval. All right, so that's our quote. Submit for approval is now on there. It's good. And let's also have a look at the Lightning record page. All right, so let's add one more tab on our layout. Call it approvals. All right, and this is where you want to add your approvals components. Let's go in there, and what we want to add in there is the work guide. Flow Orchestration work guide is going to pull any active steps for the current user that's running on this, right? So we'll call it approvals in our case. No need to modify anything on this, and that's going to show up on there. We can also add the, I think we can add a list of the approval trace. Yes. We'll add that on there for visibility as well. So it's going to show us all the approval work items that are open for this specific quote. Those don't necessarily need to be added on, but let's add them on for now. So let's save on our quote layout. All right, this is already active. Yes, approval requests are our record. I'm going to go in. There's an approvals app that's created in Winter 25. So as soon as we submit this for approval, I'm going to show you what it looks like. So let's hit submit for approval. We can again enter our comments, hit submit. This gets submitted for approval. All right, quote is submitted for approval. Let's refresh. Our status is moved to in review. So far so good. I do not see. All right, I don't see any approvals because they're not with me. All right, there we go. That's finally loaded. But we do see that there is an approval work item that's assigned to another user, which approval chain it's sitting in. No, Calvin, no smart approval so far. I mean, the approval work item still exists if it gets recalled. But I mean, so I'm sure there's a way we could actually, pull that data and see whether the same quote as an approval for that specific user, but then you also have to compare field values. So sure, it's possible to build it with flows, and you could actually have some Apex running in there if possible, but there's nothing out of the box so far for this. All right, so we see the approval work item in there. If we actually go in and look at the approvals app, all right, so let's go to the home page of our approvals app. A couple things that you can do on there. So you can admin approvals, you can review submitted approvals, review pending approvals, and manage your approval workflows. Let's go to review pending approvals. Approval emails. Well, we are in flows, right? So I didn't create anything in this workflow, but what you could do for any emails really is, as soon as you get into your approval step, if you know who the user is, you can have another background step, and that goes out to that user and sends out an email, but nothing, as far as I can tell, automated to allow you to do this. See, there's no option for this. I imagine what you could do is leverage this flow, the approval evaluation, right? So before your screen, so you have your choices, you have decisions. What I'm not sure that you have is, do you know who the ID of the user is? But if you can get the ID, you could actually run this before your screen shows up, and or maybe not, because then it's going to rerun every time someone loads it. So that's probably a good idea. Maybe don't listen to that last recommendation. But really what you would want to do is run a background step with another flow that sends the approval request by email, and at the end sends either the rejection or the final approval email if you wanted to. All right, where were we? If you want to recall, I'll show you the approval work item. So if I go on my approval work item, all right, couple things. So the approval work item is a child of the approval submission. So if I go back one level to the approval submission, from there I can recall. There doesn't seem to be an easy way to actually do this from the quote record so far. But as an end user, you could have a list view of your own approval submissions and go in and recall if you needed to. And then you have your approval work items. So again, as an approver, and we'll go in and we'll log in as that other user, and we can see what it looks like on the quote record, but also from the approval work item itself, you can review, which is going to launch the flow that we're going to see on our quote, right? Approve, reject, add comments, confirm. Override is the same screen, but for admins, or you could reassign it to someone else if you wanted to reassign the quote to another user. So let's take a second and jump into our approver user and see if we can see that screen flow from the quote itself. All right, so again, you can review as that user, you can review. Now, I think the approval app should be available to other users as well. I mean, again, this is, a skewed test because I'm running this as an admin, but from the documentation, it should be available to everyone because you can see your own approvals in that app as well. So it could be relevant to other users if you wanted them to go through this. So they can either see it from the assigned approval items, or if you want, you can actually go on the quote, and I can remember what quote I was testing with. Approvals quote. All right, so we see our quote on there. And if I go to approval, we see that I'm in the manager approval step. I can make my approval decision. No, I don't think you could approve or reject from well, I mean, again, I'm sure there's some way that you can handle this in Flow or with some Apex in there, but I don't think so far you can approve or reject by email. And, there could be a way. I'm not, I'm not saying it's 100%. There could be a way that you can do this and I'm not aware of it. It's, my answer is limited on my experience so far, my testing so far, and the documentation that's available. So let's go in and approve our record. Let's hit finish. All right, there we go. So our work item is completed. I don't see it anymore. The approval work item is also going to be updated with the status of approved. And if we go back to our quote now, maybe the orchestration could be stuck. Yes, and so if we go, you can actually go in and see the details of your orchestration as well. Not sure what that error message was. So you can go to the orchestration step run, the orchestration run, and you can see all the different steps. So you can't see the chain itself, but you can see from yes, agreed, Wayne. If you give it a name that's a bit more straightforward, you can actually know what why that approval step exists. Now, what's happening with all the steps are completed. Finance and operations is also completed. Let's go back to our quote. Oh, did we? Yeah, I didn't actually set up this step for it to update the status to approve. So that's why I didn't approve so far. So we went through the entire thing at this point, right? In the way it's currently set up. So we have one approval, the background steps to either reject or, and the approval step for the manager. There's 145. We can then try to add one more step in there. We have 15 minutes left. So let's see. And now so this is where, so if you wanted to do, no, let's reload this first. Seems still logged out as the manager. Let's undo this. All right, so let's add more approvals if we want on this one. So now our first stage there for manager only had one approval, right? So if I add one more in finance and operations, yeah, that's where I'm going with the parallel examples, right? So, so if I add only one step to finance, then it would be, a simple serial approval. But if I go in, I can actually say, let's call it first finance approval. So if we add two of them in there, so we'll use the same evaluation flow, then they're going to be parallel. They're going to get they're going to get the approval request at the same time. So we want, again, approval request, evaluate the approval request. The approver type is going to be a user. Let's simply use the same user for this one. We want to, again, same record ID. We want to do lock the record. The record is actually already locked. No, sorry, the record is not locked anymore. Once that previous step is completed, it's going to get unlocked. So you want to lock it again so it remains locked. Approval chain, let's call this one finance. All right, so that's our finance approval. So now if we want to do parallel, I'm going to add one more step in the same stage. So one more. And then we want to make sure that it's set to when the stage, which is the default value, but when the stage starts, the step starts. So both steps are going to get launched at the same moment. You could have both steps in series within the same stage. The issue would then be, though, that if the first one reject, there's no actions happening between the first and the second one. So you would get an approval only to end up in a place where it's really rejected. So you want this right away. Let's call it operations approval. Again, same flow, approvals request. Let's assign it to myself. Same record ID. Now, this is where you don't want to lock the record because it's already locked. So you only want, if you have parallel steps, you only want to lock it once. Approval chain name for this one is going to be operations. All right, and when the assigned user is completed the action, this step is completed. That's true. And then finally, we would want one more stage to update the quote status to approved. So let's add one more step. It's going to be a background step, and then we're going to want to do approved quote. The action is going to be our quote update flow that we used earlier. We still passed the record ID. Now the update type is going to be approved. Right, this is fine. Why do I get an error on this? Oh, see? Yes, it will be a lot of fun to deploy with potentially hard-coded IDs in there. I mean, but we'll see. I'm sure ultimately, I think it does give us more flexibility, but yeah, it's a lot of getting used to when we're used to advanced approvals, in CPQ. All right, to Wayne's point, before we actually go in and launch this, let's do discount. We know it's the same, really is the same evaluation in our case now, but we'll act as if the criteria was different for those approvals. So discount greater than 30%. Let's see how that shows up. Why? All right, there we go. Think we've got everything we need on there. Oh, sorry, no. We actually need to make the same decision here before we set it to approve, because if someone approval chain so far is purely text, although I guess you could, I think you can, it's a field in Flow, so you could, if you had a get on a list of approval chains, for example, in a custom object, I guess you could pull them this way, but so far what I've done is simply put in text, but you could also have dynamic resources based on flow data that you're pulling in. All right, so final decision there you want to do is make sure you've got approval from both finance and operations. All right, so is it approved? So to be approved, you want to go in your discount greater than 30%. You want to go to finance approval, output, get the decision, make sure it's set to approve. And in this case, we want to check both now. So we want to go again and discount greater than 30%, but now operations approval, output, decision. And you want this one to be approved as well. If they're not both set to approve, then it's going to go to our default outcome, which we're simply going to connect to our quote rejected here. And if it is approved, then we want to go into our background step for approval. So I think that's fine as it is. Let's save this as a new version. All right, and then we'll go back to our all right, so it's simply because my user doesn't have an email. All right, so that's fine. Let's go back to our quote. Let's quickly set this back to draft. All right, and so we still have the old approval work item. What's going to be interesting, I did not test to see whether those stay in after, although they should stay in because they're simply records, unless there's something that actually goes in and updates those records. All right, so the quote is submitted for approval. Let's refresh. All right, so we know it's approved too. We see the approval chain name. And I guess the reason why, I mean, from what I can tell, why even if I wanted to do it custom, I'm not sure where I would get the data to do a preview approval, because it's not, well, first, those records need to be created before you can actually see the approvers. But the approval work item is only, or maybe it's based on status, but only seems to be, let's go and have a look at the approval submission. Yeah, so the work item is only created for the step that you're currently sitting in, right? Not for the following steps. It is the Lightning Web Component on, yeah, so the button that I've got on there, submit for approval, is a custom button that launches a Lightning Web Component, which then triggers the approval flow and passes the record ID. All right, so we've got our approval sitting for the manager approver. It's in review in the approval chain name. So if we go on this, let's just hit review and avoid the login as for now, just so we can push that through. All right, so this one is now approved. This one is now sitting to approve. Let's go back to our quote. All right, see, so we've got, all right, so we have, so we have the approval. Well, the first one is the one that we did on our previous example. Now this is the latest one. I just approved as the manager. And then we only have one for operations, not one for finance, although it could be because I've already approved it as the other user. Yeah, that other user theoretically has already approved the quote. So I think we're just simply not sending the same. It seems like it's not sending the same approver two approvals for the same quote, and doesn't seem to be an option, whether you want to do that or not. Well, let's see once we've approved this one. Simply confirm that we actually did not get, we don't get another approval triggered. All right, so this one is approved. And if we go back again to our quote, yeah, nothing else shows up on there for the final approval. So we simply got two of them, and we did not get any approval for the other step for finance approval, because that user has already approved, which leaves us in an interesting place, because now it's refreshed to be sure, but we've gone through all the approval steps, but we're still sitting in review because one of the approval has not gone through. So if we look at our approval submission, it's still sitting in progress. And if we look at our orchestration run, yeah, it is also still in progress. And then if we look at our stage, yeah, so here's right what we're running into. So so quote and review, that stage has gone through. Discount 20%, it's completed as well. Discount 30% is still showing in a review because we have the finance approval that's setting to not started. Now, obviously, if we had sent that approval to someone else, I believe it would have gone through. But there's certainly a reality where most customers have different approvals for the same users. So there might be something to consider here, and make sure that if you're stuck with a step in not started when the other one is completed, you need to go on to the next one, because now we're simply stuck in this step that will never get triggered, essentially, in our case. Even if I log in as the other user, I don't think the approval work item doesn't exist. So I think, we can try to log in, but I don't think he's going to have any approvals either on his user. Let's have a look. Yeah, all the approvals are done for this. If I go and try to have a look as the other user at my assigned approval work items, it's blank. So I believe what you would need to do here is, so your stage by default is, all right, let's have a look. We edit that element, it's set to when all steps have been marked completed, the stage is marked completed. So I think what we potentially need to do here is set up custom requirements. We're going to run out of time, so we can't make it to that point. I think we probably all have meetings. A decision element for the finance user. Yeah, so Wayne, I guess you're saying if the if the evaluation was different than the first one, you think that it would get sent again to the same user for second approval. It's possible. Or it's possible that let's see. Yeah, I mean, it could be, again, it could be testing. I'm fairly new to this. All right, so we're about to run out of time. I'll keep going and test, and I'll keep everyone informed. I need to try to be as documented as Wayne, but I'm not as structured as you, Wayne. So I'll try to get you to document this, and then I can use that going forward. But there's a lot of testing to be done. As with everything, I think that we've seen in Revenue Cloud so far, the documentation is not, fully complete yet. I think hopefully it gets updated by Salesforce. All right, we've got 1 minute left. So thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join this and learn with us. And I hope this was helpful. I mean, I know it's not, again, I'm still testing this. I think we all are. So I hope this was still helpful for everyone. I can actually hang on for a couple minutes. I'm not going to on another meeting just yet. If there's any other questions, any other subject we want to take a look at, and if you want to take a minute in the comments if you'd like me to do this again, and if you've got any ideas of what the subject should be of the next one, I'd love to hear it. So I'll hang on for a couple minutes if you have questions or comments on where we should go next. Have a good day, everyone. Yes, Nick said, I'd love to talk about usage-based pricing. I have still not figured out how to get it working. I didn't ask the question on the Slack channel. Some other companies said that they got it working. But then someone from Salesforce commented that there was an error that they were potentially aware of, and they would get back to me. So I hope they do, and I can make a video or a webinar on it. I will say my initial comments would be, because I still was able to go through the full setup for rate management, as they call it now, and it is a lot of data to create before you can actually have a usage-based product set up in there. So I'm going to be interested to see how it works once it's fully set up and it actually works. Tough to say so far because I haven't really used it. I set up the data, but nothing beyond that. So I'll be curious to see how that works. I did work on, for a deal that I'm working on, I did work on updating the pricing procedure to override the list price, to essentially create a custom list price. Instead of using the price book entry, I'm pulling the list price from a custom table and doing some calculations on it. And really the use case there was that they need to track price book entries by date. So I created a custom table to track dated list prices, essentially. So now I added in my pricing procedure a new list price element in there that pulls based on the quote date, evaluates where it sits, and grabs the correct list price based on the date. So that's pretty interesting. Probably make a video on this at some point if anyone's interested. All right, so we're down on current viewers, so I'm guessing everyone had to, I'm sure everyone had to go and other things to do. So I'll drop off unless there's any other questions that come up. But thanks again, everyone, for watching. Have a good day, and I'll catch you in the next one.